Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this discussion with regular people out there in the netherworlds, because we're in this ongoing campaign to try to extract all of the elements of what is into the Clean New Deal, which is the repository of what millions of people need to wrap their heads around that haven't yet, that need to understand what we can do to turn the tables on what we're in the midst of, as long as we're recognizing the same things. Now, as this discussion evolves, there's a chance there may be more people that join on, maybe not. We're just doing an impromptu situation. And I'm going to send out an invite after I do a quick introduction to the group at hand, and then we'll get rolling. So let's start with really what should be on all of our minds at the moment, given what we just saw yesterday, specifically in Phoenix, Arizona. And there was a mega church celebration of Charlie Kirk's life, in which we saw a number of different, shall we say, MAGA rally like scenarios, as we have since 2016. But now, in a situation where we're past the insurrection of J6, we're past whatever happened in the election, we're past Doge, we're past all of these things that we've seen with our own eyes that have created this situation that I might also check off the box with ICE, masked military incursions into, let's just call it, deportations, whether or not these are unconstitutional, given all of the lies that we've seen through the Supreme Court and appeals court. And I could litigate pretty much everything, but I want to hyper focus specifically now on the speech that Stephen Miller gave. Now, Stephen Miller, I don't even think to this day most people even know who he is. Stephen Miller may be the president, as a matter of fact. Stephen Miller is the chief of staff of the White House. And, his bones in this sort of evolution of MAGA post 2020 and then post the insurrection, and then, of course, all things, whatever you want to call this calamitous end based on Trump regaining, the office. Stephen Miller started his notoriety, his claim to fame was he was at Duke University during the Duke lacrosse scandal, where there was this sort of, if you remember that time period going back to 2005, 6, 7, the previous 10, 15 years, particularly in media, anytime a white guy or a group of white men may have been in the intersection of some sort of sexual scandal, chances are that they would be guilty long before anything would come out in the press or a trial or anything else, just through perception, because we'd gone through a whole, so we say 10 years of this sort of sexual kind of, wrestling scenario that would lead to, sexual harassment cases and all sorts of stuff. In this particular situation, Stephen Miller was an editor of the Duke paper, and he was constantly on the side of the Duke lacrosse team. Now, as it turned out, the Duke lacrosse team were either set up, or in either case, the evidence wasn't requisite what the indictment was. And so they were basically they were not found guilty of whatever was happening at this time period, which seemed to be innuendo or sexual harassment or actually group rape, depending on who the situation is. And I don't remember what all the absolute details are, but that's where Stephen Miller came from. Stephen Miller didn't come up through the party and all of these types of things and work for somebody in the Supreme Court or maybe possibly for a tall building law firm that gets involved with politics, runs for office, rises up through the system, kind of standard within American politics, to become something of a chief of staff for the White House. No, he came up, as did Charlie Kirk and many of these other scenarios, of a right-wing apparatus fueled by billionaires that have been fighting the culture wars for literally the last 15 years. And as such, it's become a network of propaganda that spewed in front of our faces yesterday, where Stephen Miller has decried that the left doesn't know what it is brought upon itself. Now, to hit the rewind button on what he might be referring to, if you really want to understand this peculiar scenario that Stephen Miller himself is Jewish, and acting and projecting in some ways what we can see is a step and repeat of Joseph Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister for the actual Nazi party. It literally is verbatim, some of the stuff that's coming out of his mouth. Now, by the way, if you added that into what Steve Bannon had to say yesterday and everything else, you see that this is a hive matrix of a religious theocracy that has manifested to galvanize millions of people into a sort of populist movement, not unlike what happened in Nazi Germany, not unlike what happened after a gentleman by the name of Ernst Rove was assassinated by a Jewish assassin right around the time that a lot of Polish Jews were being deported from Germany. And then right about the same time, I'm trying to think of the other big scenario. Oh, it was just the battle, quite frankly, between the fascists and the communists in Germany while that was happening. And then there was an assassination of Ernst Rove. The next thing you know, we had full on Nazi Kristallnacht and all of those things that would solidify the complete control of the Nazi government. And then, of course, 70 million people dead later, we end up with the post World War II world that we inherited and we're in the midst of, that is obviously shifting into something very quickly and rapidly. And the final piece that I want to kind of put into this at the moment is we just saw last week, of course, the nature of Jimmy Kimmel. We see this continued corporate merger, this mega merger. There's discussions, of course, of Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, happens to be 81, but his son inherited the big company by the name of Skydance that just took over Paramount. They're in the process of taking over Twitter. Apparently, there's an initiative to take over HBO Max. And then, of course, this in contact to Disney and the magnitude of the mega merger between Nexstar and ABC Tri-Cities on the corporate mega merger side, where we're literally in the United States, where we've all grown up with, like, what now the last 25 years, thousands of different sort of methodologies of information being consolidated into a mega merger of what is state-run media. Now, we can compare this to Mao's China. We could compare this to Stalin's Russia. We could compare this to Putin's Russia. And it does seem step and repeat based on Putin's Russia. But meanwhile, what I'm proclamating and what I want to hear from you guys and discuss and see where we get with this conversation is that I'm proclamating that there is nobody on the Democratic side that has a plan or a vision to meet and defeat corruption head on. First of all, I hold that most Democrats are in league with billionaires, and that's absolutely crystal clear. And as we're going to approach the midterms, of which we might not have actually an election, it doesn't appear to me that way at the moment. But even if we were, what would be the option? Now, what we've done with the cleannewdeal.org, built on tens of thousands of hours of being in the midst of this thing for over a decade, where we were able to present the ultimate fusion of the racketeering enterprise that took over the world in the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended, because money fuels everything, okay? And if you don't understand what is corruption and how to defeat corruption, there's no chance in hell you're going to be able to meet this fascism head on. Now, I've said for, 670 truth bombs that corruption births and fuels fascism. But meanwhile, I do hold that until and unless you understand the blueprint of how corruption works on a monumental scale, which you can understand through the con at thecon.tv, that gets you into the dialogue to understand the methodologies of how this works in context, the way the law is supposed to work, that gets you then to the solutions, which is the Clean New Deal. And I will add one last thing, that I believe, it's my theory, that the Democratic Party is going to rally around Barack Obama, that Barack Obama is going to become the champion to be able to somehow defeat MAGA and Trump when he gets his opportunity. I might be crazy. I don't think so. But whether it's Obama or whether it's the sort of DNC-controlled apparatchik that created Obama in the first place, what I would say to you and every other Democratic out there that's trying to sort out what it can be done in the moment, the Obama administration made what we're in the midst of right now inevitable. The Obama administration is responsible for the massive corruption that has overrun this country, that gave the opportunity to all of the powers that be behind the Trump apparatus, which of course is the billionaire infrastructure that enabled this goon who is such a mind blowing idiot. But to think that this guy could have run the insurrection, could have done what he's done with what we've seen with Doge and everything else that most of us know is Project 2025. And I could ramble on forever from here. I think I've made my point. I want to turn this question over to you, Sam Stribling. You're an engineer. You're a man after my own heart. We listen to the same kind of music. You've participated on these conversations before. However, you also live your own life. So I want to know several things and see if you can maybe try to put all of these things together. First and foremost, A, what is important to you at the moment? What are you seeing from your neck of the woods? What is your priorities of your agenda of what your priorities are? And then if it's not too much to ask, but I know you're smart enough to do it because you're a hell of a lot smarter than I am, can you please respond to what it is that I'm proffering by way of the Clean New Deal based on your knowledge set? Can you try to put all of that together for me?
You may have to help me through remembering the questions as we go. But yeah, I mean, right now, just a little correction. I'm not an engineer. I'm an environmental biologist, but I have worked with a lot of engineers,
I'm
environmental
sorry, you
engineers,
have
that
told me
is.
that
And
before, and I apologize. Yes, you're
that's all
absolutely,
right.
yeah,
No
scientist.
big deal. I work with them. I understand their language and their thought process and all of that. So, big deal with me right now is the way that the world, not just the U.S., but the world is ignoring any issue, any climate issues. We're like pulling away from all the progress that had been made. And one of the things I do want to say about the you mentioned Obama being responsible. In my the reason in my I agree with you in a sense. I think and that the reason he's responsible is that the other side could not stand having an intelligent, eloquent black man in charge twice or win the election twice, and the pendulum is swinging way far in the other direction. I think is really what's going on. I think you may have a little bit of a more of a mechanistic kind of explanation of it because of policies or whatever. But that's one thing. The other thing is just the freedom of speech. We're losing that. We're everybody's being attacked, and particularly if you're a voice in opposition, they're doing everything they can to try to squelch that. Even attacking and lawsuits and all that kind of thing. I've personally had somebody in some volunteer work I'm doing attack me, not physically, but verbally, just because of what I was doing, and it's a direct outgrowth of all of this. Um, the main thing for me is the environment, and it's voting rights, it's free speech, um, and all the freedoms we're losing. So that's I'm not sure I answered every question you asked me, but um, let me know. Let me know.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing. And I'm gonna ask you, Reagan, to kind of respond to what you just heard, and kind of what are your thoughts in context to some of the things that I've laid out.
Well, I think these everybody knows things are in crisis. There's bad things coming. Everybody's grasping to make sense of it. But there's not a lot of serious analysis. We're offered partisan stories, just made up gibberish. The other side is stupid is about all we hear. The con, that financial understanding of the bigger overarching context can really clarify things. And that for me up here in Canada, what that means is imperialism. You're always reminding us that corruption breeds fascism, but fascism is just imperialism come home. That's how you treated the folks overseas for a long time. And I'm in one of those colonies, Alberta. We have all the oil. And staring at that oil and Alberta, more than enough oil to cook the entire planet. You could run an entire empire off the amount of oil hiding up here in northern Alberta where no one else can get it, has been central to World War One, to World War Two, and I've been arguing for some time now that World War III is already well in progress because of the similarities I see every time. In 1914, there's three things common to all of the three world wars. It's seizing foreign oil reserves, Alberta being a central focus before World War One, before World War Two, and then I've been writing for years. Americans re-seized control of Alberta's oil again before World War Three. In 2022, the Americans installed another premier in Alberta, who, on the anniversary of Trump's insurrection this year, promised to double Alberta oil production, offering it to Americans an extra 4 million barrels a day. So, this overarching financial corruption is what's coming to a head. It's too much of this financial shenanigans of printing money, of buying back, putting bad assets on the public's balance sheet and waiting. And then Trump comes in and picks a fight with literally everyone on the face of the planet. And what they're hoping to do is for folks to stop buying American bonds, to impose a financial crisis on America so they can take the gloves off, knock people over the heads, put them in order, discipline them, and make them absorb the costs of all of these debts coming due. That's what I see coming. And each of these three world wars is premised on three things. Two of them are pretty obvious: seizing the oil reserves and censorship. Canada has had official censorship, a very extensive, since the moment we got dragged into World War One. That's the first thing we did. We put in an official censor, and it's serious. It's been the basis of all domestic repression since. Political policing is founded on that. But the third strange ingredient to all three world wars is the natural gas in a small central Canadian town. Wheatley, Ontario, is just a nothing town in Ontario where the Canadian oil industry began. And by 1898, it had been secretly sold to the Rockefellers, who have owned the Canadian oil industry since 1898. And in the lead up to World War One, Wheatley, Ontario got a natural gas hookup. In 1907, which I would argue that's when the train tracks towards the First World War really set into motion, the empire politics that led to it started in 1907 when Wheatley got natural gas. And the road that led to World War II began again in Wheatley, Ontario in January 1936. The headquarters of an American and British fraternal society, secret society, imperialists, blew up. A few days before the British king was euthanized and a pro-Nazi king was installed in Britain recently, or briefly, and that was spiraled towards World War II, seizing of Canada's oil and the destruction of this building in Wheatley, Ontario. And I learned all this history because while I was studying this stuff, while this was a major political issue in Alberta and Canada a few years ago, when there was funding, this was a major political issue. That same building in Wheatley, Ontario that had blown up in 1936, the exact same building blew up again in August of 2021. And by the following year, Canada's national newspaper had done an in-depth investigation. It wasn't an accident. The same building that had blown up in 1936 had been leaking natural gas. They couldn't find it. They let it continue leaking. They left the electricity on. They left the people in the buildings for months. They evacuated a couple times. Luckily, this time they evacuated them just moments before it finally did blow up, but it's caught on camera. Once again, just like 1935, this same building in Wheatley, Ontario is demolished in a natural gas explosion. And this building is owned by this British and American conspiracy that began on January 6th, 1798, about reabsorbing the American Empire into the British Empire. And you can see all of world history since then as a British imperial chess match of the Monroe Doctrine and the gold standard in America, and finagling Germany and Russia into destroying themselves in World War to ensure British and American imperial control. And you can see that happening today. The second state visit, the light hands on Britain. That is the kind of bigger context. And just like Alberta's part of that American empire, so is Palestine. The treaty that subordinated Canada was signed in 1940. And then after World War II, We signed it again just before real oil was discovered in Alberta. Just so we were reminded, it wasn't just a wartime thing. We own you. The day before, billions of barrels were stolen from Alberta. They found it. They never paid for any of it. But um, it's that same February 1947, when Canada was reaffirmed as an Alberta colony. That's when the British cabinet formally quit Palestine, quietly handed it to the Americans to deal with. And that's when Israeli ethnic cleansing began. The planning for it began 6 months on the ground, happened 6 months after that. And initially, it was with American assistance. There's a biological campaign of poisoning wells and other things that was with American assistance, that ethnic cleansing, because just like Canada, in February 1947, Palestine and Alberta, the two pivot points of world control, that is the oil industry. And in February 1947, they were both reconfirmed as American colonies. And what has been playing out is some game of that, controlling that oil, the landed aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and control of Alberta, a source of trillions of dollars of stolen loot that can then be financialized on Wall Street. And that's where these 3,000 billionaires have come from in the last 25 years. It is this enormous looting of Alberta. Tens of trillions of dollars of oil has been stolen. They don't pay for it. They use Canadian banks to have Canadians repay their loans for them. But that's what was behind the housing crisis, the subprime loan predation, was using this Canadian collateral to prey on Black Americans. It's the same racist imperialism that spread across the continent. And then after America was colonized by 1890, it turned out. And the Philippines, Hawaii, Cuba, etc., that imperialism got a little sophisticated in World War I. They don't talk about it anymore. You're not supposed to or allowed to, and that does most of the job for you. But just acknowledging it, recognizing it really helps clarify what's going on today, making sense of it. And it also leaves a rich tradition of resistance and people that have overcome this all over the world that can guide us. And we're entering a bad situation, but it's one that many people around the world have faced. And many of them have thrown off the shackles over different periods in their life. There's a lot to learn from there, and a lot of potential allies for Americans committed to the ideals that you were founded on, that mere citizens, suckers, believe in. And that's the secret, that integrity and those principles. That's what's going to save things and right the ships. And it's everywhere except in the elite. That's the difference between them and us. But that's the only difference. It isn't we're too smart. It isn't that it's impossible. It's a crime. They're crooks. And if we can prove it, and there's ways that that can be done, they can go to jail. It doesn't happen all the time because of the nature of their power, but the law is the law. And that's our best hope of put an end to these crimes that will soon end all of us. These are financial in character, but this sort of abandoned. We live on a closed system, and it's going to end all of us. And so, whatever side of the aisle or whatever you think the world should be, it's an existential challenge. It's us or them. The billionaires get their way, or we could have a sustainable future. And the great thing about the scale of the crime that Patrick has documented, $71 trillion, that's enough money to solve our problems. It's not, the scale of this problem isn't a bad thing. When there's law, that's our money. That there's no mystery on how to solve this. It can be done. Folks like Sam could guide us if we were following the principles and had the integrity. It is no giant mystery at all. It could be fixed and it could be paid for. I learned that from Patrick. I learned what was really going on in Wall Street, and that answered all the questions I had in Alberta because it didn't add up. It wasn't what I learned in political science. I looked at the accounting. The numbers don't add up. There's something going on. Nobody was even interested. But Patrick had the answer. Nobody's even asking the questions. Patrick has the answer. Nobody wants to hear the answers. That's our problem. And that also proves, Jesus Christ, we might be right. If the top people all over have no answer, they get all squirrely and run away. They just told on themselves. And they're never going to do any more than that. They're not going to implicate themselves. They're not going to send texts to their lovers laying it all out for us ever. But if we know what's going on, then we can follow the dollars and prove it. And many places in the world, that's enough for people to go to jail. That's what needs to happen. And Patrick knows all the people expert in achieving that.
That was a
Patrick,
hell of a dissertation and a wonderful trip around the last, relative modern history and globally. And there's obviously many more details we could discuss and provide and follow up on. But I do find myself coming to this situation with dialogue like that, which I think is so incredibly important. But at the same time, some people want to that I've seen and I plugged into, and I believe and I understand there's so many important lessons to learn from history, right? But you just described the financial history, which nobody fully understands. And if without the money, without the currency, without the, you know, everything from commodities to resources, that's how the world runs. That's how the world has always run. And how that is arbitrage and laid out in wars and everything else, the power, the consortium, that's the nature of humanity. It always has been and it always will be. And so what we've done and what you've just so eloquently got us to in the conversation is that, yeah, we have the answers. No, we literally have the answers. We have the answers that no one, as you just laid out, will ask the question. No one will try to get there. Now, did it seem complicated? Yes, no. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Roseanne. What are you hearing here, and how do you want to address what you're hearing?
as you began today with Stephen Miller, it seems, let's use the word strange, that you can get all these people on a Sunday afternoon to this memorial service. Okay, how'd they all get there? How'd they all know about it? That's one thing. And I'm going to jump right to this. Stephen Miller is an expression that an Italian friend of mine who passed away told me a long time ago. He used the term l'eminenza grigia, the power behind the throne. Now, we have had many powers behind the throne. The first one that comes to my mind is what happened when Woodrow Wilson had a stroke? Who took over? Okay, so I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna leave that right there. But so you've got this spontaneous gathering of people for a guy that I bet a lot of those people didn't even know who Charlie Kirk was. Okay, that's one thing. How'd they all get there? Who coordinated this? I got to think, were they paid? That's one side. On a Sunday afternoon, on a Sunday afternoon, that's crazy to me. Okay. That's one bucket that I'm thinking. I look at Sam and I think of people that I know who would rather play golf than close hundreds of golf courses because we're in a major drought on the West Coast. They'd rather play golf than think about what happens when they don't have water. This ties together that people just, we breathe, okay? We breathe. Unless you have COPD or you're on oxygen, you don't think about breathing. You don't think about it. It's all so easy. Air, water, everybody is just so, I have to use the word comfortable because it all ties in with everything that Reagan always talks about because it's my life as well, not I knowing some of the details of history, okay? But it's my life as well, growing up with the corruption right in my face, asking the questions and never getting the friggin' answers. Never, never. So here I am, 10 years old. I ask a question. How come all the newspapers have the same headlines? I'm asking questions. I'm asking why the women who see live garbage being thrown into a quarry and go out there and try beating away the garbage trucks, they saw the garbage. The next day, when the machine establishment person was sent to talk to those very women, and his words were, no, that wasn't live garbage. And they said, oh, you're right. We didn't see it. So I'm putting all this stuff together. I'm putting big, a big memorial for Charlie. I'm putting how did they all get there? I'm putting people don't care about breathing or water or if they kill all the bees or if they do away with animals and plants. And I look at all the stuff that's happened to me, and then bam, August 9th, August 2020, it all comes together for me because I have lived through being knocked down, kicked around, you name it, never being able to actually get the questions answered, first of all. It doesn't happen. So what happens? Patrick goes on this journey, asking the questions, and it all ties together for me. Whether it's uh, Trump, whether it's Pam Bondi, whether it's people in the place where I just moved from who are so hateful. I had to get out of there. All this is one continuation. It's one circle. All this stuff fits in. Everything fits in. And if you can't breathe and you don't have water and you don't have food and you're so ignorant, lazy, stupid, whatever you are, not to ask the questions and look for a plan. Hey, we're going down, folks. We're going down. And if you don't want to go down, you ask the questions, you look at the plan. If you can't take the time to see the plan and what can be done, look how different we all are. Look how different. If you can't see the plan, we see the plan. If you can't see the plan, You are, as my mother would say, you're up shit's creek without a paddle. I don't want that to happen. I want people to not merely survive, I want them to thrive because Sam knows it can happen. Patrick knows it can happen. Reagan knows it can happen. I know it can happen. And there are millions of others out there. All they got to do, open your eyes, ask the questions, ask, and look at the plan. Look at the Clean New Deal. And I turn it over to you, my friend Patrick.
Okay, just a quick comment about everybody showing up yesterday. And this is not to be an insult, it's because we all live in our own universe and we know what we know. Now, I didn't know much about Charlie Kirk, to be honest with you. I knew he was out there. I knew what Turning Point USA was. I had my I was suspicious of what was the matrix of funding that had put it together, but I didn't really delve into it because I knew they were out there and I knew they were part of a broader consortium of corruption. That's from the guys that we're trying to turn the table on, first and foremost. But to your question about how did they all show up there yesterday, just so you know, they had over 5 million subscribers. They've been doing this for years, going way back before 2016, I think. This guy, Charlie Kirk, who didn't have a college education, was seemingly propped up by big money sources to fuel a directive towards the youth of this MAGA movement, of which he became the sort of ultimate vector of. So he was a huge, so if you're going to put this in the context of, let's say, Hitler Youth, or if you're going to talk about the full picture of what the Nazis were able to, engineer based on Goebbels and everything else back in the day, he was a huge part of it. Now, ironically, he was also connected to none other than Jewish funding sources, and I'm talking about guys that are absolutely humongous in the world. I'm trying to think of Ackman. Okay, Ackman is one, and there's several others. Okay, there's this sort of situation that really beleaguers the mind from a standpoint of why would these guys want to fuel a Christian fascist movement? Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they've been doing it for like 30 years. In context to, there has been a right wing Zionist movement funded by people like Sheldon Adelson and others that were all about expansion into the West Bank and some other things that were happening in the Israeli conflict for a very long time. But they infused with the evangelicals many years ago. Okay, now if you understand who the evangelicals are, they believe literally in the nature of the rapture, which is in the New Testament based on Armageddon. I believe they are sending a message through this consortium: game on. This is the end of the world for them, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. They're going to stop at nothing. This is what Stephen Miller proclamated yesterday. This is what he said outright. And again, understand who Stephen Miller is. He's a nobody. He's literally projecting his own revelations of how useless he is onto the people because they're using the psychomantics, the psychology of lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. And the problem that you always get with people that are educated is that they listen, they learn, they think, they discern, they have critical thinking skills. These are things that we all know have to evolve over a lifetime. The people that they got 50,000 people in that arena yesterday are people that have been a part of the megachurch calibration for a very long time. They're believers, my friend. Was there an architecture and engineering that would enable them to, with the big money situation behind whoever the people are? Yeah, of course. That's how they got the Phoenix Stadium in Mesa, Arizona, where the Phoenix Cardinals play. I was flipping around on the TV yesterday thinking I was going to watch a football game, and I was like, oh, here's the Charlie Kirk Memorial. And then when you heard what Trump said, what everybody and who was there, it's the entire MAGA party. Now, you could insert Nazi party, MAGA party, quite frankly, in terms of their construction, but that's what you just saw. And so, what I'm saying to my friend, Mr. Shribling, as well as Reagan, you've heard this all before from me, but I want to turn this back over to you. Sam, from the perspective of systems. And by the way, I will add this just in terms of the correlation from where you started, because obviously the environment's super important to you. We just heard from Reagan about the, I don't know, centuries long imperialism that's baked into the oil financial construct. And that's all part of what we're revealing, because the answer to all of that is right behind me. But it's also the answer to the corruption that controls it all. And so for those of you who are like, and I've seen this on my feeds, like, in fact, I invited one of our friends who I wanted to hear her make her position very clear, because you can hear the nuances in our discussion, in our threads and so forth. But she's like, look, we've got to get rid of this problem now. That is the Trump problem. And then we can deal with all of the other elements. No, we can't. They're all the same thing. And we've been dealing with the same thing for the last at least 50 years. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. They've gotten better at their organization. They know exactly what they're doing. And what they're depending on is the so-called resistance to do what they know they're going to do. Run around in circles like chickens with their head cut off, or like cats that you're trying to hurt, because they have no vision. They have no understanding of the problem. So you can't fix the problem. Have any of us fixed a problem that we didn't understand what the problem was? Has anybody ever done that? If you can't completely identify what the problem is, can you fix it? Okay, I appreciate that, because it's always ongoing. I'm seeing Sam roll his eyes a bit, thinking that there might
I
be,
mean,
other elements. But here you go, Sam. So, Sam, listening to what Reagan said and what Roseanne had to say, and ultimately what I'm saying, does anything not make sense to you, or do you have questions, or do you have your own position based on everything that we're talking about that is important to you moving forward? I mean, how do you solve this problem?
man, one of the big thing to me that I didn't mention before, and I don't believe anybody here has mentioned it so far, is the separation of church and state. That's huge to me. That's number two after climate. If you separate church and state, you could be focused on the science part, not any clouds, anybody up sitting up in the clouds directing things. If it's science, if it's objective, a lot of the decisions and problem solving will happen. It may not be fast, but it'll happen. And the more or the less distinction you have between church and state, the less we're going to be able to deal with the technical problems. The as far as all the social problems, the political problems, those are different, but they are related. I think all of that. I think, from what Reagan was saying, I was trying to keep up. I consider myself a student of history, amateur historian. I'm really focused on the American Civil War. I've grown up reading about it, and I live near a battlefield right now, and so it's all just very interesting to me. But that's really small potatoes compared to everything we're talking about. So, um, the reason I rolled my eyes a little bit, Patrick, when you said about solving the problem you didn't know about or didn't completely understand, the small problems. Yeah, you can do that without completely understanding it, but the bigger problems, you do need to know the ins and outs and the boundaries and how far reaching and historical based it is, but smaller problems you could deal with. The and Roseanne, having said that when she was coming up through this and listening to you and are getting to know you and about how much she's been through, and like having her, being beat up and pushed around and all of that. I mean, I get that, and that's horrendous, and that is happening more and more. I see, as far as all the all the stuff that ICE is doing that we hear about on a daily basis. I did hear about the one thing, a couple of things, Patrick, I wanted to point out to you is we do know more about Stephen Miller than just Duke. I've read a few things about him in high school when he was in Los Angeles. He is Jewish himself, and his family's basically disowned him, but he would stand up at high school. Out in the auditorium yelling at custodians because they're not doing their job. He didn't want to be picking up trash because the custodians were already going to be they were already being paid to do that. So that's something that he's got quite a bit of notoriety going way back that far. The But yeah, so to me the two big issues are climate and separation of church and state. And all, to me, education is all rolled up in that too. You have if we're getting away of focus on education, we're going to be moving away from all of that to moving away from climate. We're going to be moving away even more so and moving away from caring about separation of church and state. So,
okay, well, I think that's a really terrific paradigm of understanding of where your mind is, and I appreciate that. And we've created the Clean New Deal to address a lot of things that you have touched upon, not necessarily church and state, the separation of church and state. I think there is certainly room to discuss that because that is a huge component of what I just laid out was this religious theocracy that we're now completely engaged in. I mean, to remind ourselves that we're a country that what is in the Constitution, the separation of church and state's got to be like what, fourth or something. I'm just going off of memory, but in terms of its priority,
can't
but it's
remember.
right. It's right up there. But
It's up there.
it's the whole notion of obviously why we were, the Constitution was born in the first place, first and foremost. But we see all the time, this crazy machinations, particularly on the megachurch side, right? That's why it's so interesting to me, for example, that these people would literally find their savior in a guy that's a pedophile. It's absolutely incredible. It's absolutely brilliant, the dance of it, really. It's just the sickness of this distortion of this perversion. I could go on and on and on, but I'll just say that their only God is really money. That's their God. It has nothing to do with anything else, at least not that they can see. Maybe they can just see the white people that they hang out with in these mega churches and people that they're supposed to listen to and their businesses and everything else. But all they hear is that the other guys are the enemy. So what have we seen in history before when the other guy is the enemy? I mean, obviously a rhetorical question because we know what happens when the others are the enemy. But what I'm trying to speak to is mostly the folks that are of good mind, sound mind, principled mind, people that believe in science and truth and justice and liberty and functionality of the law and all of those things so that we can have a society of dynamism, of freedom, of liberty, of justice, of all of those things. That's what we're supposed to be. But are we, Sam? Are we any of those things at the moment?
I think we're striving there. I think we're not there. I think we're not there. I think there's a lot of people that are trying to do it. They may not know which direction to go or how hard to push.
Okay, well, so basically, what I'm going to ask both of Reagan and Roseanne, but I'm going to start with Roseanne in this particular case. Can you address, from the Clean New Deal perspective, some of the things that Sam has identified and what he might not be thinking about in the construction of what it is that we have that takes the core of the problem, corruption, and then be able to bring the chemo of truth to this whole scenario of lies that this entire administration feeds and depends on to survive. Because if we had a law, the $7 billion we just saw that Trump pocketed, while all of these other insane things are happening, not to mention getting a 747 from UAE, and then all of the other elements that are unconstitutional. They're unconstitutional. They're illegal what he's doing. It's against the law. He's broken the law. There are remedies for the law, but he's not going to prison because the Supreme Court said he's above the law. Okay, so that's one in many scenarios we got to unpack at the same time. But there you go, Roseanne. Start and run with it the way you want to.
When you
I'm sorry, can I say one thing?
No, go ahead.
I meant to mention something that's become more and more obvious as the years go along dealing with this clown is that he is operating on the mindset that he was trained on by Roy Cohn from the McCarthy hearing. It's just that is accuse everybody else of what you're already doing, and that gives him an out, confuses everybody, disperses attention, it distracts, and we can't forget that. He accuses other people of things he's already done, he's already doing, or his family's doing, or somebody like that. So we have to keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
It's all bull. It's all crap.
The formula is lodge and I switch the blame and implicate, but every accusation is an admission of guilt, really. But go ahead, Roseanne.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. The thing is, at the moment, and this has been building and building. It's now on what I call ludicrous speed. The law has no integrity. If you have no integrity and you have no guardrails to stop any of this, if the well, I'll just use the word guardrails. If the law isn't there, the criminals run wild, and that's what's happening. So the law has no integrity. Money has been just given freely and illegally to the people, the very people, the very, as my friend Tom Murphy calls them, criminals in suits with no shame. They've been given the fuel, illegally, by the way, the trillions of dollars to lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. Okay? That's all that's been done. Sam, you can give them all the facts. You can tell them tomorrow they're not going to be able to breathe or they're not going to have water. And what happens? They don't want to believe,
It's all right. I
right?
call on my computer, so I'm gonna have to get back.
Okay. People want a plan. We have a plan. The plan is called the Clean New Deal. If they really want solutions, all they have to do is reach out for free. All they have to do is go to, and you see, we have two different backgrounds, Patrick and I. What Patrick has behind him is actually what I came up with without even discussing it with him. Okay. And why did I say Patrick Lovell presents the Clean New Deal for the title of our website? I know it's kind of long, but you know what? It was imperative to me, without talking to him, without talking to anybody else, against the advice of our web designer, it was imperative to me to show people we have answers. Patrick has asked the questions, he's done the work, he's done the investigation that the DOJ, the SEC, the FBI, they didn't do with bazillions of dollars, okay? But he did with his partner, Eric Vaughn, who's a lot closer to my heart than I realized. And I've known Eric for a little while, but people have to get me in the heart. They get me in the head first, okay? Patrick got me in the head first. It was the facts, it was the details, it was a solution. I don't just want to keep frickin' talking about shit. I want to solve issues. So here you go, folks. Look at Patrick's work that he did with Eric Vaughn. Look at the con. What is it? You want to build a house? You want a plan? You got to look at the blueprint. Here's the blueprint. Here is the con. And today, I can tie any problem, any issue you want. I don't care what label, what color, what whatever you are, to if you have a group of people like global oligarchs, like criminals in suits with no shame, who continue to feed from the trough of the public purse, to mix metaphors, if you continue to be sustained and propped up by the full faith and credit of this United States of America, you got nothing to lose. You got get out of jail free cards. You ain't going to jail because you know what the judge is going to say. You know what the frickin' Supreme Court is going to say. Sam can tell people all day long about the facts. I can tell them the facts, but I have to inspire them to want the solutions, to want the clean new deal that lays out the blueprint, the solutions, how we can get from, of, by, and for. We're in the corruption. We want to get away from the corruption to, of, for, and by the people. Okay? And the people are sitting on their butt watching Charlie Kirk, watching Trump say stupid things. Stop it. Okay? Stop it. Here's the plan. You want to save yourself, you want to save the planet, you want to save your grandchildren, you want to keep going to football games, you want to keep going on vacations, you want to keep doing what you're doing, do something about it. And we got it. It's right here. And who's presenting it? Patrick's presenting it all the time. And what happens? I present his stuff. And Sam presents my stuff. That's our stuff. He does it all the time. I see who's doing what. I may be a little, okay, let's see. I can't do it now. It's weird being the same age as old people. I may be a little old, but hey, I keep going until I can't go anymore. And that's all. It's easy. It ain't rocket science. It's racketeering. Don't you know what a thief looks like when somebody comes and takes what's yours? Okay. Don't you know that? Of course you know that. So do something.
Reagan, let's have you kind of take us out of here. Tell me what your closing comments are for today.
Well, I know I'm just a regular guy, but I I've uncovered a solution. The way that I found Patrick was William K. Black, the Noam Chomsky of criminology, who understood the law, the regulation, the economics, and the con is Bill Black. He's still kicking. He's still doing the same thing. Watched it uh, happen again in 2008 without consequence. And what Patrick learned and what the Clean New Deal and the con has done together with Bill Black and his team of fellow folks is the solution. That's how we can do it. And my work here in Alberta is actually premised on someone very similar. That the idea of getting out from under the imperial boot of America seems like a pretty tall order. Like it's for like that's too. It seems way too much. Except it already happened in Alberta. Peter Lougheed was elected in 1971 and ended U.S. control, U.S. looting. That was the end of the gold standard and the beginning of a class war in America and the beginning of what led to the savings and loans scandal when you lost control of Alberta's oil. But Peter Lougheed was the grandson of an imperialist that helped create Alberta and was a part of this imperial conspiracy. But he went broke during the Great Depression. And by the time his grandson came around, he went to Harvard and he learned how the system worked. And he came up under a coal magnet and he built a political system and he took power without ever. But my challenge has been he never dared say a word about it. He never spoke about the Americans. He never said what he was doing. He just did what was necessary to regain control and to have political power. And once the money was flowing into a democratic independent government, pave roads, build hospitals, build schools. That's the Alberta I grew up in. It was possible. The challenge has been figuring all that out. When that was incredibly taboo, even the people doing it never spoke about it. But I've been learning about it and learning about it and using what I learned from Patrick to make sense of what's happening and what you can distill down to the Canadian achievement that I have used retroactively to expose all these crimes. The simple, quiet, seemingly simple, incredibly powerful thing that Canadians did is we legally mandated industries. The oil industry is the one I know of and follow closely, but they're legally mandated to report their cost of production. That's it. It doesn't seem like much, but if you know how much companies are spending to make their money, you can make a very critical distinction that allows money to be of no object. It's the basis of MMT. That's nature's surplus. That's the free money. The money they earn over 110% of their costs, getting their money back and a little profit for their effort and risk. The difference between the revenue and their costs lets you figure out profit, and the remainder of that equation is unearned profit. The amount of money some balance sheets gets to keep in its pocket, way above a 10% profit on its costs. That's the unearned profit. That's the excess that they don't have any right to, and what modern society was supposed to be funded by. Capturing nature's surplus and the unearned profit of these assholes making money in their sleep, that was supposed to fund the world in the 19th century. And up until World War I, everybody from the Rockefellers' advisors, leftwards across the spectrum, everyone believed that industrial development was eventually going to lead to democracy and all sorts of freedoms, but it was derailed during World War I, and it was because of accounting. This week, I found the foundational academic paper of American accounting, and it is a bald-faced scam. It's since 1917, generally accepted accounting practices ignores debt. That's American accounting versus reality and double entry bookkeeping. Accounting is one equation: assets minus liabilities minus equity equals zero. It's a mathematical, it's one of humanity's greatest inventions. We don't understand how powerful it is, but nothing can escape. It's a monitoring system. It monitors every transaction, shows where it comes from, where it goes to. You can't cheat it. It was the basis of the virtue of the corporation, that if we had double entry bookkeeping, well, you could have a legit organization. You could have something big and powerful, but it could be legit because you would know what was profit and what. But that's been fudged and we've forgotten it. And that's been codified in America. And what I've come to realize here in Canada is that if you mandate cost reporting by these industries, financial, industrial, oil, etc., their revenue is pretty simple. You subtract costs from revenue, that tells you profit, both earned and unearned. And you can make that distinction, and that's how you fund society. And what I've been trying to do for 8 years here in Alberta, if you know that, and if you add in here, we have environmental debt, that when you get a license to drill a hole in the ground, it comes with the obligation, you got to return that patch of land to something like it used to be. And so there's legal debts connected with all that. And that's an incredible opportunity to hold these jerks accountable. That they're running up these giant debts on the public's balance sheet, these environmental liabilities that'll come due to taxpayers if they're not honored. And the beautiful thing about oil and gas is by the time you run out of money, there's nothing, you run out of oil, there's no money to pay for the cleanup. That's why nothing ever gets cleaned up in the world. It's never going to. That's the trick. When you come looking for money, it's too late. With math, with cost accounting, you can watch it all play out in real time. You can monitor every day how much profit is made, how much excess profit, how much do you not deserve that we should tax away. And 150 years ago, economists knew, American economists, the first academic economist in America at the Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia, wrote an entire book with a sophisticated, dynamic understanding of the economy, saying that everything could be funded burdenlessly with this nature's surplus, and the same remains true today. Uh, all this stuff about international tax havens, all this stuff we know, comes from a fantastic accounting professor in America, Richard Murphy. And he came up with a very simple law like this that made every corporation report their balance sheet transactions in every country. And if you said if you got every country to do that, you could add it up and you would know what they were up to. You would know when the money was showing up. The unearned money shows up in a tax haven, you got them. And that's been used to great effect internationally. And something similar could be done in every US state, every Canadian province. If you had a law that made them report their costs, then all of a sudden you know how much money they didn't earn and they don't deserve. And that's how these jerks got to where they are, is putting all this money they don't deserve. And however they got, whatever the crime is, that's another factor. And we got Bill Black to go after him and put him behind bars and to make sure the next guys don't do it. But in the meantime, starting tomorrow, all that extra money belongs to citizens. They should be capturing it, collecting it, and that can fund, it can solve all our problems, fix everything in Alberta. There's only 5 million of us. We're being robbed of trillions. So if we had the rule of law and double entry bookkeeping, we would just be helping our friends around the world, financing their operations to do things. We would have more money than we knew what to do with. And the same could be true all over. And it comes down to understanding what's really going on. And then the solutions can be really simple. And cost reporting that's what all economics was basically invented, to erase the idea of unearned profit. It doesn't exist to them. You won't find anyone besides Michael Hudson who will admit there is such a thing anymore. That's why academic university economists were created, to pretend it doesn't. Everybody earns it. Rockefeller earned all that money. It's not quite true. And if you can prove it, all that money could be yours. It belonged to the public, and you wouldn't have to worry about billionaires causing havoc.
One thing that, I mean, Reagan, thank you so much. One thing that happened just last week, I mean, I assume everybody on this call has heard of the Oxley-Sarbanes Act.
Sure.
It came into play, yeah. So that requires quarterly reporting of the sort you're talking about. Well, just last week, and maybe 2 weeks ago by now, the Orange Buffoon proposed that it go to biannual or semi-annual reporting once every 6 months. And you could sneak, what he's looking for is the opportunity to sneak as many wrongdoings into the accounting process that they can do. And he's going to keep pushing to have that set aside, and of course he's been sitting on the Fed's shoulders, trying to get them to do things, decrease interest rates and all that kind of stuff. It's all part of what you're talking about.
Which goes into what Reagan also talks about, potentially collapsing the dollar and whatever comes next because of crypto. Just a quick reaction that bridges both. Obviously, we're talking about transparency and everything that's happening in the so-called, it's the RICO administration. That's what it is. It's a racketeering, corrupt enterprise. That's what's happening because they're scrubbing FinCEN files right now. They're spreading all the data. He fired the statisticians at the labor of statistics. And then now, of course, what you're talking about is another sort of hijacking because they already got SCOTUS. They already had Congress. They already have the media. Why wouldn't they get the Federal Reserve? Okay, what is that? Okay, you could call it authoritarianism, but it's fascism in the end of the day, especially when you have troops out in the street going to knock on your door to pull the jackboot clamp down of everybody who's not on the same page of this religious theocracy that is the engineering machination of what many civilizations, which aren't civilizations, other countries have done throughout history. that lead to absolute apocalypse, which these guys hope for because they think it's the end of the world anyway. And that's what Steve Miller is saying. So, in closing to everything, transparency is absolutely part of the Clean New Deal. So is actually recreating the paradigm of energy and the law. Now, it doesn't mean to rewrite the law. It just means to create the integrity of the law that exists. We already have the laws to be able to keep all of these things and to throw Trump in prison 10 times over. However, you have a corrupt Supreme Court that literally got over $160 billion backdoor to it through a literal backdoor that was all managed by Leonard Leo and his far right, relationship with Opus Dei, and that's part of this whole thing because of what happened with Dodd, or excuse me, what is what supplanted Roe versus Wade? Dobbs. I almost said Dodd, as in Dodd-Frank. Dobbs. But a lot of this stuff requires, for people that are watching, and if they got through this, hopefully the intellectual set that do have a college degree, that think about things in terms of, however far your life has gotten you, that you understand complexities, you understand systems, you understand that, it doesn't, it takes a while to be able to turn the Titanic around because of just the nature of how huge these things are, right? But what I'm saying is we don't have time.
We don't.
Corruption burns and fuels fascism. The end of the world is nigh. For those of you who care about environmental collapse and all of those things that are associated with, environmental sciences and things that we've known for now 40 freaking years, right? It's imagine like back in the day when it's the struggle between the tobacco companies that had a complete monopoly. You could see it throughout Hollywood and the pictures and everything else. There was a glamorous aspect of it. But somebody was saying, wait a second, cigarettes cause cancer. And it was how many years before they finally had a Surgeon General warning, not to mention all of the, clawbacks by states and massive state settlements with the tobacco industry, because hundreds of thousands of people were dying of cancer. But by that time, it's too late, right? We're in the midst of the end of the road. And the Clean New Deal is the immediate way to deal with the corruption that controls the fascism with the law. And if you understand the common sense of what we've put together in our precepts, the Clean New Deal, starting with a new Glass-Steagall Act to prevent the looting from the Treasury, to be able to provide billions of dollars or trillions of dollars to billionaires illegally, which is what we've done for the last 14 years, which has enabled them to create this outcome that we're looking down the barrel of. The other side of that, of course, is legalized corruption, which we have in Citizens United. But you've got to understand the four mechanisms of the perversion of power in the United States, because we're not a democracy, nor do we function as a capitalist system. We're a corporate fascist. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. So how do you stop that? Well, I just told you, you got to get a new Glass-Steagall Act so you align interest and make it impossible to float racketeering, and B, you get money out of politics. That's the beginning. But then you got to deconstruct the perversion of power. You got to understand what qualified immunity is. What is qualified immunity, Sam?
They can't make anything stick, because they've been saying that they could do that. The higher ups can, because of their job, they're not responsible.
The cops can shoot to kill and not be held accountable, right? So that means
Yep.
they're above the
Yep.
law.
Yep.
What about
Yep.
judicial immunity? Should the Supreme Court be above being the law themselves? Should they be above the law?
Of course not.
Should the
Of course
president
not.
be above the law?
Of course not.
Okay, so those are all self-evident, especially if you believe in liberty and justice for all based on the law. But our reality is what I just told you. We have an immune president, we have an immune Supreme Court, and we have cops that can shoot to kill without being able to be held accountable. So we've got to be able to turn that all upside down and right side up. But ultimately, how do they do that in an electoral circuit? What do you think about, have you ever considered the Electoral College in terms of the, shall we say, the control of the minority? Sam, what's your contention on that, or your reaction to what I said?
Well, I mean, it is born out of the slaveholding culture.
Jim Crow,
It
absolutely.
goes back to that.
Absolutely. And that's
Yeah,
exactly antithetical to democracy. And they say, well, we're a representative republic. Yeah, for the power of the robber barons or the slave states to wake up, America. You're
the
not
plantation holders,
the
yeah, owners.
plantations owner. But what people need to understand above all else, and when I say this, Sam, how does it land? What's your response to this? We've given tens of trillions of dollars illegally to a criminal apparatus that is easily indicted and convicted under RICO statutes, at least, but there's so many others. Of course, Reagan talked about Bill Black. There's a whole other garden variety of what we call control fraud. There's a myriad of laws to take down corrupt CEOs, just like we would take down the dons of criminal organizations. My question to you is, does it not land true, or do you have any questions about whether or not we gave tens of trillions of dollars illegally for free to the billionaire apparatus?
As you mentioned, we have the laws. The law, my reaction is the laws are never enforced. Very rarely enforced. So it's about enforcement.
That's called corruption. Corruption is the decisions that happen in the shadows that
Yep.
basically allow deception to rule you. Who
Yep.
in what world does that make sense? How about one where, let's say, and I'm just going to use a biblical reference just for shits and giggles, but how about if Satan took over, right? What did the Rolling Stones teach us, my friend, in Sympathy for the Devil? Do you remember some of the lines in Sympathy for the Devil?
You can't always get what you want, right?
Well, close enough, but pleased to meet you. Hope you guess what's
Oh
befuddling you.
yeah.
What's befuddling you is the nature of my game. It's just deception. This is nothing new, but the reason you have the law is so that you can turn the tables based on getting the elements of the crime to be able to indict it in a court of law, which is why we had a revolution to begin with, was it not? Did we not have an
Yeah.
American revolution to turn the tables on tyranny to create the Bill of Rights and the Constitution? Wasn't that the whole point, Sam?
Yeah.
Okay, so this
So
is a
what?
reboot. What do you see back here? It's a declaration to reboot the American dream. Is there anything so far that you disagree with within the Clean New Deal?
Not that I know of. I
Okay,
mean,
so now,
I do have to dig into it in more detail, but
well, I just told you what's in it, but I'm going to tell you
yeah,
what's more. But you can certainly ask more questions. But ultimately, if we can spend $71 trillion in the last 14 years on this apparatus to destroy us, that literally is, I think, encapsulated to about 300,000 people. So we have a GDP of about $25 trillion of the largest economy on the earth, which is all the the sum total of products of some total of services and products in the United States. Roughly what, I don't know. Let's call it 300 million adults, something to that effect, right? There's probably 300,000 people in the financial apparatus. We gave $71 trillion to approximately 300,000 people. Do you think that's a really good way to manage an
of course
economy?
not. No, of
Okay.
course not.
Is there a better way to create a resurgence of technology and paradigm change based on scientific understanding and ways to fix problems with $71 trillion, conversely?
Oh, oh yeah. I mean, go back to education. You could go into education. A lot of the problems will be solved if we train people, give them critical thinking, uh, uh, you know, how to do critical thinking and get them into different fields and
Do
what they're
we,
interested
but
in. All that.
do we have time to wait, let's say, 2 generations to be able to solve these
Oh
problems?
no, of course not.
Okay, so we already have the education right now, just because we came up, fortunately, many of us in this system before they decided to kneecap it. But my
Yeah,
point is to everybody watching this, we don't have to ask where do we find the money. We're a fiat currency. It's all based on productive capacity. You don't have to worry about inflation if you re-stimulate and float the productive economy. Inflation comes from too much money in the hands of the few, honestly. And what is the Federal Reserve doing right now? What has the Federal Reserve been doing since the last 14 years, Roseanne? What is their stated premise? What is their stated mandate? But what do they
They're
actually do?
supposed to have uh, low unemployment, okay? And they are supposed to have
Low inflation.
manageable
it's
inflation, not runaway inflation.
And what
There's
do they do
right.
instead? What do they do instead since 2019?
the opposite.
Yeah, well, what they did is they guaranteed asset value. That's what
Well,
they did, and portfolio. So they protected the economy of the top 1%. That's what they did, and then they turned the tables on 90%, and it was like good luck with that. which, by the way, is socialism for the criminals. That's what people need to understand. It's socialism for the criminals. I know a lot of beautiful people out there who are like, socialism, you can't conflate this because capitalism never had the law and all of these other things, and we can get into ideological, idiosyncratic sort of debates about certain things, but you can't when you know the truth of what's in the Clean New Deal, which is this isn't hyperbole, Sam. We have the evidence of $71 trillion. That's on the low end. That happened from 2009 to 2019. That was before COVID. But there's other elements of this that lasted into the Biden administration as well. Because the big trick to this whole thing is the bad guys, they learned how to do MMT for criminals through the back door of the Federal Reserve because they illegally utilize Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to continue to imagine exigent lending to the system of racketeering. By the way, Sam, just so you know, in the statutes itself of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which provides the United States the ability to deal with a global war, this, that, and the other, maybe natural disasters to get themselves out of problems, this and that. Because when you have your own currency, you're not borrowing from anybody else. The stability is your own fiat currency because of the productive capacity of the nation. But it says in the statutes that you cannot use exigent lending for speculation in commodities markets, specifically in real estate. Now, let me ask you two questions based on that, Sam. A, does that surprise you that the people who wrote that legislation would make that qualifier?
No.
Of course not.
Really. No.
Is it a surprise to you, Sam, that you're only hearing this from Patrick Lovell?
Yeah, somewhat, yes.
Do you understand that's why my friend Roseanne put Patrick Lovell on the marquee? Now the question is,
You've done the work.
I appreciate that, but the question is, you know me kind of. We've kind of got to know each other, and obviously we have a lot of very similarities, and we care about the world we live in and everything. But you never heard of me before, finding me on social media, and we've had a number of interactions, and you still have more to learn. But let me just ask you a question. On a scale of 1 to 10, do you trust me? And if so, where does that land and what does that mean?
I trust you. I mean, I think this is probably the only the maybe third call I've been on with you, and you're absolutely correct. I didn't know your name before this. I don't believe I might have heard it, but it just didn't sink in, And I think on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm in the upper half for sure. 7, 8.
Cool. And you're a scientist, So you've got to be naturally, skeptical because you can't be a scientist if you're not skeptical. But I encourage you to dig in further. But let's just say, what if I'm 100% right based on everything I've said so far? Do you see anybody else in your threads that is giving you this information?
No.
Not even remotely, right? Now, let me ask you a question.
I don't think even remotely. Yes, correct.
Okay, so I didn't anticipate being able to be in a position to ask this question, but this is really why I was hoping to have this call. I like Bernie Sanders. I always have liked Bernie Sanders, okay? But I'm a little critical of Bernie for a couple of reasons, primarily because he's not giving you this information. Is there anybody in the Democratic Party that you've heard say anything close to what I'm saying?
No, because everybody in the Democratic Party, you're only picking around the edges,
And because you're playing ball with the billionaires, are you not?
Yeah. And I think Bernie Sanders, I've always liked Bernie a lot, but he sort of his mic, what he depends on, he counts on his mic drop moment being when he says, "Oh, you can do all this for free." Well, it's not for free. Something's got to be paying for it. And, what you're talking about would actually pay for it.
Okay, well, here's the bottom line with Bernie as far as I'm concerned. Lovely man, beautiful guy, been around doing a great fight for a long time. But he thinks of the world from being the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, more so than he does from the seat, the cockpit of the presidency or Congress, quite frankly, right? Even though he knows all of this stuff now, but he learned a lot about it when he was older, and he still has these comfortable places, but he speaks some jargon and hyperbole from the standpoint, even though he should have all of the information I have. In fact, I know he has all the information. I don't know how much of it he retains, but he because of just the political consternation of this whole thing. But Bernie Sanders, for example, once said during the 2016 election, candidacy for the presidency, he said, Wall Street's business model is fraud. Now, when you make a statement like that, Sam, do you think somebody should ask him what he means by that? Do
Oh yeah,
you know they never did?
yeah.
And he never had
I
to
would,
describe it?
yeah,
See,
yeah.
what I'm
Well,
providing
that's
it
like him saying, things for free. That's like, well, who's going to pay for it? It can't be for free.
they're called
Something's got to pay for it.
platitudes.
Same thing.
They're called
Yeah.
platitudes and they're not details. So the bottom line is that we've run through about 8 of all of the different pieces of this, and I want to finish this up because we've gone long, but I want to finish up with the final 3 pieces. We got to get 13 judges on the Supreme Court because we got to freaking stick it to this Roberts court. And yeah, I don't care if these are people that are on our side. We've just seen the complete hostile takeover of the United States made possible by the Supreme Court. And I say that we don't just have a canon of ethics, that they have to be, comport to the law just like everybody else does. Because if you don't have the law for the judges, how can they execute the law? Now, the question is, you might ask, well, wait, who's going to investigate the judges? Well, if we had $71 trillion to recreate the United States, do you think we might be able to put some money aside for investigations? Do you know what they're not doing now, like you just said, in terms of their etch-a-sketching? I think you brought up what was the Trump administration doing that you said that they erased recently? They've been erasing everything in terms of regulation. Do you remember what you said a few minutes ago?
Yeah, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Oh yeah, well, Sarbanes-Oxley was, by the way, where
Yeah,
it starts, and that's part and parcel to our story, because we
yeah.
know everything about Sarbanes-Oxley, and we realized back during the 2008 great financial crisis how that wasn't being used. And by the way, the final piece of that puzzle with the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court's like, this is the trick they play, okay? They're like, no, quid pro quo is not legal. You can't do all of this stuff. The laws are good, but we're going to have an imperial presidency. And by the way, we're not going to have any investigations. So if you don't have investigations with professionals that can get the evidence that can actually build a case, can you hold corruption to account, Sam?
No,
That's the
no.
trick.
You,
That's all they're doing.
yeah, you don't.
They're pissing on everybody's head, telling it's its reign. So we got to capture the Supreme Court. And then ultimately, let me ask you this final question. So do you think that Congress should be able to bet, given their trades in the markets, on decisions that they make? Should they be able to front run decisions of Congress based on what they're going to fund, how, and why, so that they can personally profit from their decisions?
Oh, of course not. Of course
What is
not.
that called if they do that?
If they, what do you say? I'm not sure the word you're looking for.
Corruption. That is
Oh,
ultimate corruption. Because if they're feeding at the pig of, if they're
of
feeding at
course.
the trough of their own, corruption, people, you need to understand, if you front run, whether it's a military, designation, which you're gonna provide for McDonnell Douglas or whatever the case may be, and you're involved with that decision, and then suddenly you buy stock that they know that there's going to have, like, what, 5 years of this huge government infusion to be able to build
That happens
AI, for
all the
example.
time.
Oh, we just saw today, for example, what did I see? That what's it called? The big company in AI spent $100 billion that has a relationship with Donald Trump, where I think that the government's getting 10%. Did you guys know that? That we're literally now talking about socialism, talking about central planning. This is what Mao would do. This is what the Chinese did with their state-run capitalism that, of course, free marketeers that are supposedly MAGAs are not even aware of. They're not like, what? We've got state-run communism in our companies? That's what they're literally doing. And the MAGAs don't even know it. So
Yeah.
that's the construct of the clean New Deal. Is there anything there that on its face, based on the conversation that we've had so far, strike you as something that you don't think is a logical reaction and solution to the problems we're in the midst of?
I think one of the issues is that MAGA, even if you were to demonstrate this corruption, they are not necessarily going to care
That's true. And
because
neither are a
yeah,
lot of Democrats, because Democrats think that what? Bernie is going to save us. Is Bernie going to save us?
no,
Does AOC have? Let me say this about AOC, and I like AOC. I like her, but she's a child. She doesn't know what the situation is. She has no idea what corruption is and how it works. I can tell you that firsthand. She was on the floor of the Senate last year and she said RICO is not a crime. Racketeering is the
What?
ultimate motherlode of crimes. Yes. And here's the thing:
I didn't know
what
she said that.
all of her people, her apologists, were saying what she meant to say was that RICO is a stable of crimes in which you have to create predicate acts. Yeah, but it's the motherlode, and you can actually indict people on the RICO statute, which makes it illegal. And the fact is, they couldn't walk that back. This is the level of idiocracy that is representing the American people, and she's on the good side. So this is
No.
what we're up against, my friends, and I'll finish with this, okay? We've had 4 decades of billionaires that have developed this technocracy that came through what's known as Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation. They know every line item and aspect of what the federal government does for who and why. And they created a hostile takeover using the idiot whisperer, Donald Trump, to be able to sell God to people that are not looking at pedophilia. We know this as clear as day. So I apologize, James. I'm not trying to reach MAGA. I'm trying to defeat everything that enables MAGA, and then hopefully we crush them in the long term by using the law and common sense and science and everything that's got to survive. And so for everybody out there who is a what they call Democrat, but you're in a silo, maybe your key vector is we got to fix Gaza first. We got to fix the Trump presidency first. We got to fix whatever your come from is.
It's
all
all
of
going
what
to
you
happen.
it's all important, but you have to understand unless you can get control of this mechanism to be able to use the way the law was designed because of the way it was born out of a revolution against tyranny, can you hold power to account? This isn't a new lesson. This is the lesson of humanity. We've had this for 1,000 years. When absolute power corrupts absolutely, a group of men discover plunder where they create a legal code to glorify it and a moral code to authorize it. It's propaganda for the 1%. That's tyranny. So I've made my case. Thank you so much, James, for being in tune with it. I hope that you'll dig in further. And if you become a vector for this, we have no time to lose. We've run out of the runway. Fascism is here. This isn't tomorrow. We've been, by the way, doing this for 671 truth bombs. Before that, I've got tens of thousands of hours in the con and everything that came since. This isn't something we just decided to do. We've been doing it now for 14 years. And if we, the people, don't get a hold of this now, what's going to happen, Sam?
It's lost. Everything's
Forever.
lost.
Thank you for letting me make my case to you. I deeply, deeply appreciate your time. I deeply appreciate you as a person. And I hope we can continue this together on this righteous grind to justice. All the best to everybody paying attention to this. Onwards and upwards. Take care.
Bye.
Take care.